Hello there, and continuing today our analysis of the events, people, organizations and things of the temporal Cold War. Specifically today we're looking at the Wells class of starship. The only physical example of this ship we have seen is the USS Relativity, NCV 474439-G. Two things we can infer from that: one, 47 reference, and two, G. That means there were numerous vessels of that name in Starfleet. Now, we don't exactly know how the numbering system works within the Federation. For example, the Temporal Integrity Commission may or may not actually be a division of Starfleet. It's reasonable to conclude it probably is, but there are other organizations within Starfleet that are not, within the Federation rather, that are not specifically Starfleet. It's conceivable the Temporal Integrity Commission is a separate entity created by the Federation and maybe overseen by Starfleet, or is a sort of branching organization but isn't actually Starfleet. We can perhaps infer that from the registry number not being NCC and instead having a different registry, but that is speculation, as things like NX and NAR also exist, as do ECS and things like that, although that's a replacement for the prefix of USS, but that's kind of a thing in itself. But the point is, there are different organizations. It's possible it's not actually Starfleet. I think it probably is a branch of it, but we're getting a little off topic because we don't really know. And I've done a video on that previously to cover the Temporal Integrity Commission and other organizations which we've encountered that regulate time on some level. But the point is, what I'm getting at, is it being called G? Naming a ship Relativity when it's not part of the TIC, it's not strange, I suppose, but it seems a little weird. But being G means it's been a long time. Starfleet does keep ships in service a very long time. Bear in mind, there are some starships that are in service for 100 years that were built in the 23rd and are still in use in the 24th century. Some ships are even older than that, with some very early civilian craft or very, very, very old Starfleet ships still being in use in the 24th century that were built in the 22nd or even 21st. So, such as Antares class vessels, as an example, not necessarily always human built, but there are many ships that remain in service for a very long time. They just come out of frontline service. So the USS Relativity G, were they all TIC? I choose to think they probably were, which implies the TIC was a much older organization, relatively speaking, than what we assume. We assume, because we see this ship from the 29th century, that the organization is from the 29th century, but it probably isn't. The Wells class itself is of course named after human author H.G. Wells, again implying the organization is predominantly an Earth-based organization, meaning it is probably branching off from Starfleet. What we know about the ship's capabilities: we do know it's armed with phasers, at least. It very likely has torpedoes, but what form and how powerful these are is unknown. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that their phasers are bloody powerful. We're talking 10 times stronger than the weapons carried by the Enterprise D, at least. It has temporal shielding, but not a temporal core as far as we can tell. This is how it protects itself from changes in the timeline. These shields are likely raised every time the ship's shields are raised. It would make some level of sense for the vessel to have some, at least superficial level of temporal protection at all times in order to not only protect it while it's on mission, but if something happens, like say the destruction of the Sol system, and you arrive there and go, oh crap, everything's blown up, but why? I mean, obviously the Captain Braxton and the Eon, he arrived at the Sol system. He didn't time travel to it. It just kind of blew up because something happened, and he didn't really take stock of what was happening. Interesting, Braxton was also the commander of the USS Relativity, obviously many years later in his career, which again adds to me at least some indication that the Timeship Eon is actually more of a shuttle to a vessel like this. The vessel has the ability to transport through time. This is specifically designed to limit the vessel's temporal footprint. After all, the Temporal Integrity Commission, it's in the name, is there to enforce the integrity of the timeline. Sending agents and operatives back and scanning through time is better than sending the entire ship. However, the vessel does have a temporal drive. It of course has warp capability and is known to be very likely transwarp capable. That is speculation, but we do know that the Federation has slipstream and other technologies by the 25th century. It's likely if this ship doesn't have transwarp, it has slipstream. I would say it's probably transwarp because we know vessels like the Universe class had transwarp, and that was from a few centuries earlier. So we can only infer some of the vessel's other capabilities, aside from the ability to time travel, because it does have the temporal impeller, which, if you're interested, is what the sort of nubbin sticking out the rear end of the ship is. That is a temporal impeller that is designed as part of the ship's temporal core matrix to allow the ship itself to time travel if needed. But very likely that would be dire situation needed where heavy armament and people were needed to go back in time to deal with the problem. The vessel likely, from this point on, we're going to have to make some suppositions, likely has some kind of stealth drive, cloak or something else. It very likely does have higher yield weapons of different descriptions. We know about temporal explosives, for example, which can erase things from time. So we can assume it's got weapons along that nature. We've seen chronometric weapons before that have the ability to penetrate shields. Again, going off on a limb, say it's probably got them. It likely has support craft, but the Universe class, which was 3 centuries earlier, could grow shuttles. Ships from the late 24th century, like the Protostar, could do something similar. So the ability to replicate or simply manufacture an onboard vessel when needed is likely a capability that this ship has, although again, that is supposition. All of this is speculation. The vessel has a somewhat organic appearance, giving it a very distinct appearance, although the echoes of the sort of compact Defiant class echoings are in the hull configuration. It is a uniquely looking ship. Again, probably reflective of the kind of mission it needs to go on. Exactly what its hull is made of is again completely unknown, but again, delving into guesswork, it's probably some kind of nano hull or organic molecular hull in some way that is regenerative. That would be speculation, and it is some apocryphal sources, but it seems likely. It seems like this ship reached that point where it has that kind of capability on some level. It's not the kind of tech we see the Federation using a few centuries later, with the separated nacelles and stuff, but we're probably not far off it, and we could probably see the early stirrings of that kind of technology in this ship. We know that it'll have sensors. We know the vessel has holodecks, or at least something similar to a holodeck. They refer to as the holomatrix. So they've got something similar, which serves the same function as a holodeck on board. We know the kind of weapons the personnel can carry are far more powerful than the kind of weapons carried by traditional Starfleet in the 23rd, 24th, even 25th centuries, of course. But I don't like to delve into beta canon, so I'm not going to use Star Trek Online, although I will mention there is a lot more fleshed out lore for this classification of ship and similar vessels in Star Trek Online and apocryphal sources like novels. But as I don't cover beta canon, which is what they are, I'm not going to cover it. This is the stuff we've seen on screen that the ship can do. It can communicate through time, can travel in time, it can transport through time, it can scan through time, it has holodecks, it has weapons that are visible on the hull, still using phaser strips, I should note, meaning that's a pioneering technology developed in the early 24th century that's still in use at some point in the 29th century, which is in and of itself fairly interesting. We don't know the vessel's other capabilities. Nothing else is really known. Even calling it the Wells class is a bit of a guess, because that's coming from secondary sources, but it's generally accepted that that is the name of the class of ship. And of course, the vessel being the USS Relativity G, we can make suppositions. I am making assumptions based on logic of what other vessels we're seeing that are younger than that ship were capable of doing, and we can only assume that a vessel that is a time ship is going to be absolutely top of the range, state of the art. I mean, Starfleet does that for ships anyway, but you can only imagine this vessel definitely up there. It's top tier. And that the TIC has been around for a while, possibly even from an era like the 25th century, because we already start to hear things like Temporal Prime Directive being shouted out in that century, even possibly as far back as the 23rd. This agency likely splintered off from Temporal Investigations or evolved from that agency. But that's what we know about the ship, and I'm talking canonical. Let me know in the comments below if I missed anything about this ship, or if you want to share something that's from Star Trek Online or other sources about this ship. That's all interesting as well. Thank you for watching. We're at the end of this video. Bye bye. Just quickly before I go, because I forgot to mention this while recording it, some of the exterior details on the ship are interesting, and although we don't distinctively know what they are from certain sources, particularly the designers that fleshed out the schematics of this ship, we know what some of them are. The small oval and circular shaped sort of bumps on the hull are actually the ship's warp engines, and the point at the forward axis of the vessel is very similar to the sort of disruptor used by the Eon, implying this ship has a primary weapon mounted in the nose that is similar to the high-powered energy weapon that Braxton used to try to destroy Voyager. Also on the ventral section of the ship there is a sort of drop section which is similar to what we see on some other Federation ships, which again indicates that this is some kind of main deflector array. Although it's not illuminated, that does seem to be what it probably is. So there we go, a few of the exterior details. We actually know what they are. Other than that, there's a few sort of bumps and things we don't know. There aren't many windows on this ship, which implies its tactical nature. As I said, this vessel's arrowhead shaped design and similar sort of hull profile to a Defiant class does indicate, with its sort of narrow hull and compact design, it does have a primarily combat role when the ship does go out on mission itself. This vessel I don't think is meant for exploration or scientific gathering. It is meant for war and preventing people screwing with the timeline. Basically, they're not interested in going back in time to have a look about and see who built the pyramids. Was it aliens? Wasn't it? Who knows? They're not interested in that. They're interested in stopping somebody else from going back and stopping the pyramids being built, kind of thing. And sometimes you need muscle to do it, and this ship is definitely muscle. Other than that, there are some, as I said, there's like what looks like a sort of organic looking dome. We don't know what that is, but it does glow. It's got something to do with the temporal core, but other than that, it kind of looks like a window. It's not, but it's kind of what it looks like. It's like a skylight on a ship. Clearly not, but it's what it looks like. And there we go. Those are some of the quick exterior details I forgot to mention in the video.